There we go. Looks like folks are trickling in. It's good to be back in the room. I feel like it was just yesterday that it was October. We were talking about SB 707, and here we are, getting closer to July 1st. It's like um, when people talk about July plans, all I can think about is like this deadline coming up. So it's one of those like uh, July 1st means a lot of different things to different people. But if you're a clerk in California, it probably means one particular thing, in addition to, of course, a new fiscal year for many of us. But today we'll dive in and we'll kick off here in a couple minutes as we let folks trickle in. It's been an interesting week across the country. We've got a distributed team, and a lot of our East Coast folks were in the ice storm this week. So uh, getting this presentation together in the midst of like schools being closed and kids running around and all kinds of chaos has been an interesting start to the week. Today is nice and peaceful here in the office, and looks like the weather's very good in California.
Always
All
need a little
right,
bit of winter there in North Carolina.
everything shuts down. The office is empty today except for our finance leader and I. Uh, but anyhow, we'll kick off. We'll get going here. We're really excited today to talk about SB 707, especially from a compliance perspective. Uh, Really cover the meaty items, the high level things that are changing, and share some cool tools for how to use census data to check for language requirements, which are one of the more nuanced and tricky parts of the compliance equation here. And then we'll also share a demo of how public input works, quick high level walkthrough of core capabilities there and how that maps back to the SB 707 requirements. But ultimately, our goal here today is for you to leave the room feeling much more confident in your ability to speak to the criteria for SB 707 compliance and have some tools in hand to be confident about your plan going forward. So that way, July 1st gets here, you are fully ready to go. And with that, I'll show our agenda here to kick us off. There we go. And our plan is to go about 45 minutes. We've got a Q&A module in the chat, so just drop your questions in there. And after the presentation today, we'll send out the recording along with the resources that we share so that you can circulate those with your team. And as I mentioned, we'll go through the requirements, some of the challenges that come with hybrid meetings in a SB 707 era, and how that differs a bit from the pandemic era virtual meetings. And then we'll walk through the demo. But today, your hosts are Stephanie and I. So I'm Jay Dawkins. I co-founded Public Input back in 2014. Prior to that, I grew up around local government, and my grandfather was mayor of my hometown. So I spent many days sitting in the city council chambers, watching meetings, and later went on and I found myself in a planning and engineering role, and saw that the public process could really use some help, and jumped in to start Public Input to help government more effectively engage, but also run their process more smoothly when it comes to interacting with the public. So that led us down the path of meetings, and we'll talk about that today. With that, I'll introduce Stephanie Bergman and have her introduce herself to the group here.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I'm Stephanie Bergman. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Public Input. I've been working in the gov tech sector for about 5 years. Previous to that, I was a public information specialist with the city of Longmont in Colorado, where during the pandemic, I was folded into the process of public meetings because I helped the city clerk's office run these virtually. So this is a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, and looking forward to today's conversation. Thanks, Jay.
Absolutely, Steph. Yeah, looking forward to having you talk about your experience and how that maps to some of the requirements we're talking about today. Um, so in terms of the early run through, we want to talk about the changing public meetings requirements. You've probably heard a lot about this over the past few months, and it's always good to start with a high level overview and a simplified look at what is actually changing. So the first thing is there's a core set of things that SB 707 is leveling up and requiring for all public agencies. And we'll cover those here in a moment. But there's a critical distinction about eligible legislative bodies. And if you're an eligible legislative body, additional requirements apply. And there's even a third tier where if you trigger language requirements, which we'll talk about next. But for eligible legislative body, the rules are pretty simple. Essentially, if you're a city with a population of over 30,000, or if you're a city of any size inside of a county that has a population over 600,000, you as a city are an eligible legislative body, and that's specifically for the primary body like the city council or the county board of supervisors. So for counties have it easy here. If your population is above 30,000, that's the rule. That's all but a handful of counties in California, of course. And the interesting algorithm is more on the special district side. And it starts out with if you have a website as the first foundational principle. This one's always thrown me off a little bit because I feel like like my middle school science Olympiad team had a website, and so if as a special district you don't have a website today, well, you don't have to comply with the eligible legislative body requirements. But I'm going forward assuming that's there, especially if you meet these other requirements. So if your boundaries of your special district, the area you serve, covers a population of 600,000, a county with a population above 600,000, and you have over 200 FTEs, or if you have more than 1,000 full-time employees, or if you have annual revenues as calculated by I think it's like the state treasurer. We can share the detailed rules there, but if your annual revenues are over 400 million and you have over 200 employees, you meet those requirements. That is a pretty narrow list of special districts, and we have a tool where if you're a special district and you're not sure, you can plug in these factors and it'll provide that information. The second part is the translation requirements. And this is where it gets more interesting. And our goal is to simplify all of this and use census data and authoritative interpretations of that data to give you a very clean answer as to whether or not your city, county, or special district meets the two-part language threshold test. So we've put together a cool assessment tool at resources.publicinput.com/SB707 that walks you through these calculations and pulls in relevant data to show you the way this breaks out. But the interpretation that we're talking through here is if greater than 20% of your population above the age of 5 speaks a given language, and if 20% or more of those speakers are LEP, or limited English proficiency, then that language will meet the language threshold requirements. So you need to meet the language requirements for that language. That is the CMCA, the California Municipal Clerks Association interpretation of the rule, which strictly follows the letter of the law. There is another interpretation that we've seen from the CSAC, or California State Association of Counties. So county level rules are being interpreted a bit differently and aligned to the bill's author and their stated intent. And that starts with a slightly different equation where you look to see if 20% of the overall population of the county is LEP. And if that's true, then you pick the top 3 languages that are limited English proficiency. Both of those equations are baked into the assessment tool we built today. So if you have your phone and want to scan that and walk through the assessment tool, you can do that on your phone, or I think we'll drop the link in the chat. Bottom line, if you're a county or a special district, we're taking that CSAC interpretation. If you're a city, we're following the CMCA interpretation. And as things change, we'll of course be adapting our recommendations based on that. But right now, we want to give you an authoritative recommendation based on the data and interpretation that is being followed by the professional organization that serves your city or county or special district. So with that, if I haven't lost all of you down to that tool, plugging in all the info, we've got a few things we wanted to cover high level in terms of what SB707 functionally is changing in public meetings. The big thing, of course, is hybrid public access. So giving people a way to participate and comment live in the meeting, both being able to access the meeting telephonically, but also participate via an AV tool or telephone. And that also includes captioning. So if you're using an AV tool, such as a streaming platform, then turning on captions is required if it offers that. The next piece is the portal, which is ultimately going from a world where as long as you published your agenda, you're good to go. In this case, you're required to publish it online. And if you meet the language requirements, provide an online translation of that. So essentially a machine readable, web-based agenda that can be translated by tools like Google Translate. The bill's authors did include protections where if you use a digital translation service like Google Translate, you're protected from any potential issues. It's also worth noting that you don't have to actually translate the whole agenda packet, just the agenda itself. Um, the next piece is that public speakers, in line with the hybrid access, if you're giving 3 minutes to in-person speakers, we need to give 3 minutes to remote speakers. So essentially, the rules that public speakers follow need to be have parity for your in-person and your remote. The next part is given that this is remote access and people are tuning into your meeting remotely or participating remotely. If there's a technical issue that blocks them from being able to do that, there's now a requirement to essentially take a recess, and that recess needs to run until you can actually get the issue resolved, or it's been an hour and you've made a good faith effort and it's still not resolved. At which point, there's a couple things you have to do, which are detailed in some of the documents we can provide. But essentially, you have to then, I think it's like a roll call to kick off again. The interesting thing there is while you're solving for technical issues, you do have the option of doing a closed session. So maybe there's some saving grace if this does take a while to fix. We'll talk about how public input is taking on that challenge and looking to protect you from having to spend a lot of time on that. And last, this part we've seen less conversation around. It's one of the requirements that, as far as we can understand, is fairly open to interpretation, but it's all about making a good faith effort of reaching out to communities who are typically not represented at your meetings. And so there's no specific things that are going to be enforced legally on this around like, well, you didn't reach out to this group or that group. But ultimately, the expectation is that you make an effort to engage the public to get them to your meeting or make them aware of the meeting proceedings. And so we've got a couple tools we'll talk about for how to solve for that. So that's a quick high-level pass. Obviously, there's a lot of a long checklist here, but we wanted to get a temperature of the room here in terms of the requirements that folks feel most comfortable about. So in your Zoom UI, you should see a SB 707 compliance requirements quiz, and you can select which SB 707 compliance requirements you feel least confident about. And I can't vote in this one, so we're going to wait and see how the results come in. How's it looking, Steph?
It's looking, people are still voting, giving them another minute here to get their votes in. Very interesting, all over the board here.
Ah,
All right, give it another second here, and I will share the results with everybody. Here we go.
can you see that on my screen when I pull it over here, or is that not visible?
No, but I believe everyone else can see
Zoom
it.
UI.
Yeah.
Oh, nice. Very cool. Yeah. So if you have that same chat interface open, it looks like the top one is outreach to underrepresented communities. And that one's probably because it's the most vague and there hasn't been a ton of here's what you must do legal requirements. And we can talk a bit about the tools and outreach abilities of platform here in a moment. The second is looks like all of the above, followed closely by language translations. So we can definitely speak to those. But the good news is one of the folks that responded feels very confident and just you got this. Congratulations on getting there already. We want all of you to be just like that person says, no, I've got this. I've got a good plan and I know we can do it. All right. So I won't spend a ton of time on these rules. We already kind of walked through a high level. I will say if you would like to scan the assessment tool, I'll walk through kind of what you're going to get there. And that's probably a good way to review the detail, just given the amount of time we have today. I think wading through legalese for the next 4 slides is probably not ideal. But here in the assessment tool, I plugged in an example. I'll adjust this to an agency that's got essentially the full set of requirements. LA County is in that boat. Let's see. And so when the assessment tool runs, essentially at the tail end of it, it's going to do the math on the language spoken, stack rank the different languages that would meet the requirements. But then at the bottom are these compliance checklists. So instead of going through this on the slides, just wanted to give you a quick high level of where you can find this information. But ultimately, this ties back to the requirements we looked at. I'll briefly cover a bit of how public input is approaching this, just to give us a starting point here. the top issue that we flagged in the quiz as the least confident area is the outreach to underrepresented communities. One of the things that's unique about public input is that we actually started with an engagement platform first, and then we built meetings on top of that, actually during the pandemic, and then kept iterating. And thanks to the help from San Diego County to kind of push us down this path of here's what good looks like. We've built the platform you'll see today. But ultimately, the engagement platform at its core still has a lot of capabilities that can help solve some of these requirements, specifically the outreach. So it has a built-in communications toolkit, and we've also got a statewide community-based organization network that sources contacts for publicly available nonprofits and advocacy organizations throughout the state. So you can build mailing lists from that database or from your own list, and then every time someone registers for a meeting, they're flowing into a list in public input that you can use for outreach. So by adding that CBO network, you can reach groups that are traditionally not going to be represented, as well as reaching folks that you've already collected contact information for, and that can be done in an automated way before meetings. Essentially, once the meeting is published, sending out an email campaign with that to notify folks of a new opportunity to participate and review the agenda. The meeting documentation requirements, similar to what we talked about earlier, ultimately the main thing here is making sure you're documenting all these interactions. And for most folks, that looks like minutes. Even if it's action minutes, you're still capturing the key proceedings. And one of the really exciting tools is AI meeting minutes. I'll demonstrate what that looks like here in a moment. But we combined the agenda, the speaker records, and the recording of your meeting into the context of an AI tool to generate AI meeting minutes based on a template or an example of past minutes that you've got. So it turns up in your format. All right, I'll try to get through these next ones pretty quick here to keep us moving. But two-way, we've talked about that. I'll show here in a moment how public input handles remote access and public comment. The meeting documents, we provide essentially the agendas that you create in your agenda management system, whether that's a Legistar, one meeting, a Civic Clerk, Agenda Link. There's a couple more. eScribe as well. Those can be pulled into public input and displayed in a machine readable format that's also translated. And again, the translation is automatic. So whether or not you have those translation requirements, you can make those available to the public. And if you want to see the languages that the data is pointing to for your organization, that's here in the assessment tool. So with that, I'll bring us back into our presentation. And I believe hand it over to Steph to talk about where to go next. There's one more slide to cover before you kick that off, though. I realize I'll pull this up. So given we've covered a lot of these requirements, ultimately we've built and designed the solution set to meet every single one of SB 707 requirements and provide you a turnkey solution for that. We integrate with the tools that you use today in many cases. The thought here is that those agenda solutions are great for what they do, but don't meet all the different requirements. So there's a world where you could look to stitch together 4 or 5 different tools to meet the requirements we're talking about here. So a communications platform, a meeting conferencing system, the AV side of it, the agenda tool, the public portal for the agenda tool, which may or may not be built into your agenda tool, and then the speaker management, which could be as a form on your website that flows into a spreadsheet. There's a lot of ways to stitch stuff together here, and we're not telling you that you can't go do that. We're just going to point out some of the challenges that we've seen organizations that have adopted public input solve by having a unified platform. And so part of the goal of walking through the platform today is show you how it's different and how we've designed it to solve problems specific to the public sector and specific to the clerk workflow. And in the process, capture all of that data, bring it all into one place, and ultimately give you a place to manage this with fewer resources, less time, and less effort, hopefully less stress too. So with that, Steph, you've been there during the pandemic. You've been the person driving the meeting behind the scenes. Let's talk about why Zoom and spreadsheets aren't an SB 707 strategy.
Yeah, we thought it'd be pretty important to talk about because I think some folks are immediately going to go there because Zoom and spreadsheets, whether it be Excel, Google Sheets, is something that you probably readily have access to. But just want to talk a little bit about my experience leveraging those two tools, especially in a time where the regulations weren't nearly as strict as what we're looking for with SB 707. So if you could move to the next slide, please, Jay. So kind of three like main highlights that we want to consider here is your speaker queue. So what we've framed up is kind of the speaker queue nightmare, and how quickly your speaker queue could turn into a bit of a nightmare and a little bit more than maybe you were planning on. For example, when I did this work at the city of Longmont, we typically had anywhere from like 5 to 10 callers per meeting, which really wasn't that high of a volume, but it was still tough to manage, especially in the context of people calling in Zoom and we're calling on them by the last four digits of their phone number. They're having problems unmuting themselves. These are just all things that add up to that little minute here, a little minute there. And once you get through the whole speaker queue, you're talking about, potentially 10 to 15 minutes that are wasted. The other thing that's interesting too is that even if you don't have a high volume of callers, we would always have those situations where certain topics would bring in a large volume of callers. In preparation for this webinar, I went back and reviewed because it has been about 4 years since I've done this. Some of the meetings that I did, and there was one particular one where we had an agenda item on smart metering, which was a huge topic of controversy at the time, and we had 17 callers that came in to speak on it when we're usually used to about five, and you could actually visibly see the council members' reaction when I said we have 17 callers on the subject, and it was like her eyes got really big in that element of surprise. So not knowing how many people are going to come and speak on a particular item is definitely something that you want to consider here versus having visibility into that ahead of time. The other thing is the data silo. So if you're taking public comment during the meeting, virtually, but then also in person too, just keep in mind it's really going to, be hard to kind of keep track of where all those comments are coming in from. When I did this work at the city of Longmont, we tried several methods of this during my time there. Now, granted, we weren't required to do real-time public comment, so we were accepting comment prior to the meeting, so either via email or via voicemail, and then the clerk would just read them aloud during the meeting. We actually kind of abandoned the whole notion of getting real-time public comment during the meeting because at the time it wasn't required and it was just a little bit too complicated to figure out. So that's something else you want to take into consideration with SB 707 is what is that going to look like for you? And the third is the post-meeting hassle. So the hours that you spend on reconciling the recordings, the notes, and the spreadsheets to produce minutes. That wasn't necessarily something that was under my purview as a member of the communications team. I was there to run the Zoom, but I was there to run the meeting and handle the tech because the clerk was busy taking the meeting. So that kind of warranted having another position because the clerk had to be so focused on making sure that they were taking those accurate meeting minutes. You want to move on to the next slide, Jay?
Yeah, and that was like two people concurrently. So one person's managing the queue, and another person was
Mm-hmm.
having to document. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Yep. So it's definitely something where I don't think people realize what kind of attention you have to pay to this to the speaker queue. And one thing that we didn't talk about is, I was talking about the context of a purely virtual meeting. Now we're talking about the context of hybrid meetings. So wanted to take a little bit of a deeper dive into like the speaker queue and what that could potentially look like. So again, as I mentioned, very difficult to track speakers and run Zoom at the same time. So we tried to put together kind of a graphic just to, visualize. You'll have a Zoom screen here, and then you have spreadsheets trying to keep track of who spoke. I remember usually I would have Teams open in another window, and the city clerk and I would be messaging back and forth, trying to make sure we got people's names correctly, because sometimes it was a little bit hard to hear. So not having the ability for people to advance register to speak on an item, that got a little bit complicated. Again, something that seems like such a minute detail, but when you add that up, it definitely becomes a bigger issue. And then managing the speaker queue by yourself just can be a challenge if you're trying to do that. Also take meeting minutes. Also, you're going to be in the room. You have people who want to speak also in person. That is a lot for one person to handle. I will say that just managing the speaker queue virtually, it was a lot for one person to handle. So I can't even imagine also being responsible for doing the meeting minutes. And of course, with clerks, the other million things that you guys have to do every single day because you wear so many hats. So just something to keep in mind that this could potentially become a bigger challenge than you're thinking about. And just the high risk of errors with disparate systems. Again, the mentioned the callers and making sure that we had accurate record of who spoke. That did become a challenge when we were relying on calling people by the last four digits of their phone number and understanding when they said their name and their address. We also had to, after 3 minutes, cut them off and tell them that they couldn't speak anymore. So that was kind of a challenge on Zoom as well. So these are just all things that, with SB 707, these things were a little bit difficult to do during COVID, but now that the regulations have gotten stricter, these challenges are just going to become, exponentially more challenging as these new regulations come into place.
Yeah.
If you
So
want to.
stress aside, the resource part of it is just a lot. That
Yes.
makes sense.
Yep. Yeah. And just, we kind of wanted to outline an example of, before SB 707 and after SB 707. So like COVID area hybrid. So whether it was just virtual meetings, maybe you were running virtual meetings and not in-person meetings, maybe you've got to hybrid before, but just looking, down the list of the different things that you're going to have to take into consideration now. For example, the language translations, that was something that was not necessarily required. Now it's required for agencies that meet the threshold, hybrid expectations. The public, remote options were appreciated at the time of COVID. In some, states, there were, certainly mandates that you had to have remote options, but right now remote options are required. And kind of going back to the fact that they're appreciated, I also think it's the expectation. People are super busy. They have a lot of things to do. Being able to attend a meeting without having to go there in person is definitely a huge offering for a community. Real-time comment. This is a big one. This is one at Longmont. We just really couldn't figure it out, so we didn't do it. So often offered in advance in the before SB 707 era. After, you must provide real-time comment in a way for the folks attending your meeting to do so. And then a pause for technical failures. We didn't really have any formal requirements at Longmont, but now those are getting more stringent too. And there's nothing more stressful than running a public meeting and your Zoom starts working and you have no idea why. So,
Like, why is the audio not flowing?
yes, exactly.
I have so much respect for folks that like juggle all these things and like have to navigate that world.
Yep.
But yeah, well, our goal is to directly address each one of these things, and even from a tech standpoint, can create redundancy. Like, so let's have a video feed and a phone feed option, and even some teams have additional fallback options from there. But we want to make this predictable, straightforward, and we're not going back to the pandemic, and the world has changed a ton. Now these expectations are here. Now the legal requirements are here too. But in terms of we talked through a lot of the different things that have to happen during the meeting. We're curious to know like the current plan that you've got for resourcing the meeting and management of remote speakers. So is the clerk that's already in the room today going to be managing that? Are you thinking of bringing in IT? Do they have someone maybe that's already running the audio video that we're going to task with doing speaker management? Are we thinking let's have another member of our team join the live meetings? Are you looking at tools like public input to automate these things? Or is there something else, which I'm really curious if we do have something else, if you can drop it in the chat, because we were trying to brainstorm on what the something else would be. And I think our best guess was um, like squad of interns, like volunteers from the local community. All these things are, of course, fair game. But yeah, we're curious here. We'll release the results here in a moment.
Yeah, it looks like we have almost all of the votes in. And I will say that is something that, at Longmont, we pulled on members of the communications team, which then became a challenge for us because that took us away from the time that we had to do, our regularly scheduled jobs. And they did eventually end up hiring somebody full time to help manage these meetings. So I'm going to go ahead and end this poll and share the results with everyone. And it actually looks like one option we did not include on here is I haven't thought about it yet. So I'm wondering if maybe some of the folks who didn't respond, maybe this conversation, sparked that,
Oh, really?
oh, what am I going to do about that? So yeah, results there. It looks like a lot of folks are going to plan on adding another staff member and some people are going to plan on doing it themselves as well. So really, really good to know where folks' heads are at on this one.
Yeah, that's really good to know, especially to add another staff member. We worked earlier this week on an ROI calculator, just trying to understand all the different dimensions of the work and how people are resourcing it. And I don't know if it's on oh, there we go. Yeah, next slide. So there's another QR code. This is on that same kind of resources page. So if you're on the assessment tool, you scroll to the bottom, there's this ROI calculator. But ultimately, there's a lot of different places that new hybrid meeting requirements are going to impact your workflow. And what we're trying to gauge is how much coordination is being added pre, during, and post meeting, and can technology solve for that in a meaningful way that prevents the need to add resources, or if it can free up an individual's time to not have to go through the tedium of the post meeting manual processes, or if during the meeting, if we can just save 10 to 15 minutes of everyone's time. If you've got 4 or 5 staff members at each meeting, that does start to add up. And granted, if you do have to hire another person just to manage uh, the remote participation aspect of this, obviously it's a huge potential savings if you can automate away some of these challenges. So we can drop the link to the ROI tool if you want to check that out in the chat, or you can grab the QR code there. Thanks, Steph. All right. So with that, we'll cover a quick overview of public input and then jump right into the demo. So the overview is ultimately thinking about how does this solution work? What is public input? So for those of you who are already familiar with it, sorry for the quick high level, but the ultimate goal is a 3-component system. So one is the meeting, the online portal dimension of this, and handling all of your pre-meeting coordination. So when someone arrives at a portal, they register. They do, in some cases, if you want to enable online comment, have the option to comment, or even collect comments via other channels like email. So all of that's going in through that engagement portal. And then there's the second component, which is ultimately the admin management of this process. So the speaker dashboard, the management of agenda, speaker settings. So do we want to allow speakers on this item? How many minutes can people speak on this item? Can we adapt those things on the fly? That's all managed from the admin dashboard. And last but not least is the reporting suite and the ability to do live real-time reporting for staff, for elected officials, or for other stakeholders in this process, whether that's the public or specific department heads and the like, ultimately putting that into a reporting tool that can be shared out. And of course, all of this is built on top of a modern cloud-based SaaS solution, and it's integrated with your agenda management provider. We've chipped away little by little at agenda solutions. We're going to keep adding additional integration points, but ultimately the goal is for your process to be as automated as possible and to tackle each of these dimensions. So with that, I will jump out of the slideshow world and move into public input itself. So the team at San Diego County has been our innovative partner from day one on meetings and has driven a lot of new approaches. And so I want to highlight how they're approaching it and in the process show the platform itself. I'll hop out of this. So this is public comment.sandiegocounty.gov. It's an online portal primarily for posting the meetings. It does have the machine readable agenda, but it importantly has the option to register to speak. And if we look at any of these upcoming meetings, the agenda itself I mentioned is here. It's a very simple translatable version of the agenda. And then the high level guidance on like how we do comments, how to make a comment is provided here in the info tab. I did mention the language translation dimension of this. So ultimately that can be selected on the screen here, and the whole page goes to that. If you're using our platform to live stream, that also means that translated language will then translate the live captions under the video. So essentially, these meeting pages can be a place to live stream, be that from platforms like Granicus or from YouTube, and I think a couple others, eScribe's platform, as well as anyhow, we have I think about 6 or 7 different streaming platforms that are commonly used. Those can be embedded into public input, and then the captions go with that. But I'll keep us moving through the pre-meeting process here. Your registration form is configured one time at creation of your account or your dashboard here, and we'll include both standard fields or tailor the fields that you want to collect. So not every organization collects the same things or requires the same fields. All of that's configurable in public input. And ultimately, we want to ask folks if they want to speak. And then this is where the agenda integration becomes important. By including the agenda items here, you can elect to capture not only if they want to speak on a given item, but also their disposition on that. So that disposition can be useful later when we want to see Let's make sure we balance out the order of the speakers or have folks for and against, and providing our reports to elected officials of how many people are going to speak on an item. That way, we avoid that situation Steph talked about where council arrives and then, wow, we've got a ton of people here to speak. The fact that I don't know why they're upset or why they're here can be a challenge. That means I'm already behind on my messaging, and this is going to be interesting to see where this thing goes. So fewer surprises for elected officials by capturing these kinds of things up front, and of course we're capturing in a structured way so that we're not having to piece it together with spreadsheets and then email it to elected officials, email confirmations to the folks that have signed up. All that's automated, and because we're integrating the conferencing system into public input, essentially public input runs a public conference call. That's all built into our software. It's not dependent on Zoom or Teams or WebEx. It can integrate with those things, but your public comment is running through the public input conferencing system. It can also call folks at the beginning of the meeting and make sure they are aware that they are here. They can listen to the meeting until it's their turn to speak, at which time they'll hear an automated announcement. And as we mentioned earlier, the integrated communication system means that you can send automated email notifications to registrants, to specific lists or community groups ahead of your meeting. So that's that first module we talked about in terms of the public portal and the pre-meeting. So now that we get into the meeting itself, I'll open up a past meeting so we can see a bit of the data associated with it. So I'll head over here to the main dashboard for my meeting. One thing you'll notice is that our goal is to streamline and simplify not only your meeting operations, but also the technical connectivity. So when we think about making sure you're good to go before the meeting starts, having a meeting connection wizard means you step through the connection steps here, make sure your audio is working both ways, and you're good to go. So essentially making sure before the meeting starts that you've already established a good connection and your audio has been tested and you're all set. Up next, the agenda itself. As I mentioned, Legistar and One Meeting were the first tools that we've integrated with. We have additional integrations that are planned and in process, but because of that connection, it means that as you make changes to your agenda, as you publish your agenda, that arrives in public input and can be configured for speakers to register for those items. And those can be grouped by things like consent agenda and the like, which becomes helpful later when we get to speaker management. But ultimately, all of these agenda items can be drag and drop. So if you're in the middle of your meeting and we want to take an item from consent to discussion, you simply drag it from one section to another, and in real time, the team and the public see that updated interface that shows that is an active discussion item. So then when we come to speaker management, this is where a lot of the magic happens in public input. So when we imagine an integrated conferencing system, which when you're connected, it'll show the state of that connection up here. And if you're connected to a Zoom, WebEx, or Teams type conferencing system for your, call it your board, essentially has access to that primary conferencing platform. And then public input has a public realm that is attached to it that can be disconnected for things like closed session. But having that conferencing system integrated with your agenda and your registrants means that now when we get to having to decide who we're going to tag into our in-person or phone speakers, we would just choose the section or item that we're on. So in this case, we can choose the entire consent agenda. If we're going to process that in one swoop, we're not going to go one item at a time for speakers. We will then see the folks that have registered in advance for in-person and by phone. The other side of this is if someone does ask to speak and want to speak during the meeting and you permit that, they can either scan a QR code to register themselves. They can use a kiosk UI that we can provide, so you can put that on a laptop or a tablet, or they can register themselves, as we mentioned. They could also, of course, approach the dais and ask to be registered, at which point, like a traditional process, would fall back to registering them as the clerk, either from a card or just taking their information verbally. So all that then populates here, and as we work through our list, we can mark folks as spoken. That will timestamp their comments. That way we can map that back to the audio and capture that comment in our minutes. And then on the phone, we're currently not connected, so we're not going to see all the different capabilities here. But essentially, if someone is connected, we'll see their status as connected here, and we'll see an option to have them start their speaker session. At that point, it plays a programmed prompt to them that you configure in terms of the language you want to ask for. Not everybody in the room has to hear, "Dear speaker, please state your name and begin your speaker session." You have 3 minutes. That can all be programmatically put into the audio they hear when you click play. So at that point, they're unmuted, they're speaking in the meeting, and we start the timer, and then you can end their speaker session to discontinue that, and they hear a notice that your speaker session for this item has concluded. Again, that language and the wording can be configured. There's a lot of depth here. There's a lot of things that we could probably cover in terms of how we can mark their status. Ultimately, everything you do, every interaction with each speaker is captured in the records for the meeting and then can be used to develop your minutes based on the format that you drive towards. So all of the data being captured in one place provides the context for ultimately creating the minutes in the right way. But this is essentially how you work through the items. The circles that you see here are marking the item as active or not. That can then, depending on your configuration, disable registration for that item, or once it's closed and complete, of course, disable registration for the public to speak on that. But ultimately, as we work through our discussion items, we can mark off speakers as spoken. And if we ever have questions about a given speaker's registration, we can take a look here. If they're on the phone, we can see which items they've registered for, if they've spoken on those. And as we're doing this, as we're working through the agenda, their record is getting updated. But more importantly, the top line metrics that are shown here in terms of how many speakers we have remaining on this item is getting updated. And that is updating the dashboards for our elected officials, or even for in-room dashboards where you can see how many speakers we have left. It helps plan the meeting, allocate our time effectively, and if necessary, adopt changes to how many minutes we want to take per item per speaker. So instead of 3 minutes, we're going to move to 2 minutes per speaker on this item. So we have so many folks registered, and we see that we have an hour of public speakers remaining. Let's make some adjustments. So all of that can be done on the fly in public input. And one important consideration here, and this goes to like how we're thinking about automating these key tasks. When someone dials in on a traditional platform, like a conferencing tool like Teams or Zoom, we don't know who they are in the context of their registration and their record. In public input, if we recognize their number, we're automatically going to map that number to their registration record. And so when that person shows up, they're already the right place in the queue. We know the order of the queue and when to call them to speak on which items. If for whatever reason someone calls in and you want to allow people to register after they've called in, they show up in the phone tab over here. And public input has a huddle feature where you can triage that unknown caller. So if someone shows up as unknown, we can actually initiate a huddle one-on-one with that individual and ask them what items they want to register for, and we can get them registered to speak. Right now, that's a human one-on-one huddle process that you initiate from here in the dashboard. We think that may be a great place for an interactive voice menu, given where voice AI is at, and if that's something your agency can use, potentially eliminate the need to have someone screening callers, because this does add another layer. If everyone registers and calls in after registering, this is a thing we eliminate completely. It's going to obviously improve relative to a traditional platform, but we also hope to eventually get to the point where if someone does not register and calls in, we could see an automated process for triaging that individual. So when we think about where technology is today, where it's going, that's one of the big things we think about. All right, with that, I'll jump into post meeting, and given we're just about at time here, I'll wrap us up. One of the great things is the reporting suite I mentioned. We saw a couple previews of that. Ultimately, this is a configurable, customizable reports tool, and you can share a link to these things with your board or put it into the packet as a link. But when we think about the time savings, that might save a little bit of coordination with elected officials. But AI minutes, as we can see here, the AI meeting minutes that have been generated for this from a template are created in the same format that you use today for your minutes. So we take an example, we combine it with the data that's in public input, such as the speaker registrations, the timestamps, the agenda items, and we get the right spellings for the speakers, and we get the right timestamps for each item. And we can capture things like action minutes. So who was for or against an item, who made a motion, And then ultimately, if we are including public comment, I'm just going to scroll to see if I can find an area we have some comments noted. We're going to include those if that's something that your template includes. Oh, here we go. So public comments. We would include the names of the individuals and a quick summary of what they said. As you know, sometimes that can be very difficult to make sense of what is being said in all cases. In this case, you have AI's help to do that for you and generate a draft set of minutes that can shave off hours from your process. So ultimately, our goal is to not only help you meet the mandate, but in doing so, solve for common pain points that exist in your process today and for the new time-consuming challenges that are being introduced by hybrid meetings. When we look at where that goes as a company, I've mentioned the things that are already here. So the huddle ability, the integrations, the AI meeting minutes. But just behind that are things like text messages that can be automated, sent to speakers to remind them that it's almost their turn. Being able to set caps on how long someone can speak. And then, of course, additional agenda integrations. The next wave is that automated triage I was talking about, and what we're calling is live meeting floorboard. And this is essentially a dashboard view, but a customizable dashboard view that allows you to do things like LA County, as they look to provide an in-room essentially display of who's been called to speak, what items are being open to discussion, and then the timer integration as well. So there's definitely a whole other wave of things coming that we're really excited about. Our whole intent with this isn't to say, hey, look at these cool features, but to say we listen and we evolve with you. And that's been our recipe for success since day one as a company. And it continues to be what makes us successful today is that we lean in, understand the problems that you're facing, and bring technology as a tool to solve meaningful problems. So with that, we'll kick it back to some of these cool assessments and ROI calculators. Easter egg within both of those, if you go to the bottom, there's a hybrid meeting bingo game where at your next hybrid meeting, or if you're watching any other hybrid meetings, you can play bingo to see when certain things happen. Our goal as a company is to eliminate all the cards on that bingo game. So if you get to check those out, awesome. But with that, that wraps up our programmed agenda for our webinar today. And Steph, I'm happy to dive into any questions. Thank you for sharing, by the way, the assessment tool and the ROI calculator in the chat there. And then, of course, if you're ready to have someone walk you through your exact setup and like configuration that we would bring to your organization to solve for SB 707, there's a demo link in there as well. And we'll connect you with one of our platform experts that can set that up. And I'll probably plan to join as well, just to thank you for your time here today. With that, appreciate the chance to share what we're up to. Hope this is super relevant. I hope the tools that we're putting together in terms of assessing the data specific to your community can be helpful. And look forward to continuing to innovate in California and beyond as we look to solve this next wave of public meetings and make your life as a clerk and as a team a little less stressful and automate away some of the less fun parts of the job here.
And Jay, we did have one question in the chat for those folks who have time to hang on and are interested in learning. You've talked a lot about machine readable. What are the requirements for that? Can you speak to that a little bit?
It's a great, it gets a little technical for sure. It's really simple at the end of the day. I mean, I think when we look at HTML interfaces, yeah, it's definitely a fun technical question. The thing about PDFs, if it's a scanned PDF, it's not going to be machine readable. I think it'd be interesting to see bill author interpretation on this, but ultimately the way we've interpreted it is if it's plain text on a website and it doesn't have any structural things about it that would prevent it from being understood. Meaning, if the layout is complex, then sometimes the order of things may get rearranged. So as we look at machine readable, a lot of the same principles that apply to accessibility would be best practices. So to meet that, our approach has been to simplify it down to what's required by law here, and that's the agenda items are readable and translated. So the packet itself, again, was excluded thanks to some advocacy from probably CCBSA, or I'm not sure who did the work on that one, but ultimately keeping it simple and having an online portal that it can be translated should have you covered there on the machine readable part. It's also worth noting, big thank you to CMCA, CCBSA, and CSAC, CSAC, um, there's been so much homework and even advocacy before the passage of this bill to uh, simplify things. Not everything got simplified, so the things that are not simple afterwards, we've been able to build our assessment tools and thinking off of their thinking, and we'll continue to do so. So that way, we know that we're not just interpreting the rules one way, or we're following what professional organizations in California are putting out there as their interpretation. So whenever you use our assessment or the way we apply things in the software, know that we are leaning hard into what the interpretation of the law is by the professional orgs that are interpreting it. And we can't do that without a lot of thoughtful people in those teams putting together some good information. So kudos. Any
All
other
right.
questions?
Nope, that was the only question that we had. So we can wrap it up. Thanks so much, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it.
Grateful for you guys being here and for getting to innovate together. Look forward to meeting more of your teams and being a resource to you as we look forward to this next chapter of meetings, public engagement, and technology. We'll see you soon.